First off, welcome everybody to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. I'm really jazzed to reconnect, in fact, with Suhas Subramanyam, who's in the Virginia legislature and now running for Congress there. Suhas, thank you so much for joining us.
It's so great to be here, so great to be on, and I'm very excited. I'd heard a couple episodes of this podcast, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
We're chatting on a school night, and you've come from a day of working for the people of your district, and you and your wife have two young kids.
Yes.
Seemingly all things that can take a lot of time and effort and, definitely draw your attention away during the day. But, I'm curious, on a day like today where you've, certainly spent a lot of time doing all these things, what tends to energize you? What tends to actually, keep you with that momentum to, ensure that the work is strong in all fronts, by the way.
Absolutely. I'm a state senator in the Virginia General Assembly right now, and I'm running for the U.S. Congress. And on both fronts, I feel like I'm doing things that, if I weren't here, maybe won't get done. Today I passed a really difficult bill on trying to make prescription drug costs more affordable for families across Virginia. And I was also able to help my community fix a local issue when it came to noise coming from the airport. And these were really tough fights and things that maybe other legislators tend to shy away from sometimes. And it's sort of why I got into this in the first place, is because I want to take on tough fights and I love winning them. And so, my day starts at 6 a.m. and it usually ends at 11 p.m. or midnight. And I don't feel tired because I feel like when the work gets done, when we get results, when we can help people on their hardest days, that really drives me, and it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and has that crossed over into your parenting experience so far too? And hopefully getting lots of wins there as well.
Well, they definitely wear me out, but they're so much fun. Maya is 3 and Nina is 2. And, we are very blessed. They are wonderful. We just moved them into the same room. So that's an adventure. But no, it's exciting. One of the things, though, is I have to be down in Richmond during session, so I don't get to see them as much. It's usually weekends and some evenings. But so I miss them a lot during session. But they are what keeps me going, too, because their future is what's on the line.
I love, last time we met, you were mentioning that, yes, the days are long. Certainly, Saturdays sometimes get swallowed up, but Sundays are always protected for family time. So that's hopefully, a nice way to, continue to reconnect. You're running for Congress, obviously, and, it's a crowded field of Democrats. And, in otherwise a very, relatively purple district, which means that most people are really, seeking middle ground and looking to find, good solutions. And congratulations for helping to spearhead a lot of the stuff you just mentioned. Is there something about this district that you feel sets it as kind of a proxy for what's kind of happening nationally, especially where, a lot of people are looking for middle ground and they are in that sort of, purplish, area of politics or at least what they want from government. So, is your district kind of emblematic of that?
Absolutely. The suburbs is what delivered Joe Biden the election last time. It's what helped Donald Trump in 2016. And we are the suburbs of DC, and we're the purple suburbs. And I always tell people, even though you might see my Senate district may lean quite a bit blue and this congressional district might lean blue, the people here care more about the candidate than they do about the political party most of the time. And I talk to people. I've knocked tens of thousands of doors in this district over the past couple of years, and the one thing I hear is they're tired of the rhetoric, of the dysfunction, of the divisions, and they like someone like me who works across the aisle, who wants to get things done, who wants to take on tough fights that no one else will. They like that spirit, and they like how accessible I am. And so I've always felt like this isn't easy area to represent because my values are similar to the values of the people who live here. They want to see a brighter future for their kids and their families, and they want to see, safety and from gun violence and improving our access to healthcare and fixing our immigration system. So many things. So
Yeah.
that's right. I think that's right, and I look forward to seeing how. I think turnout's going to be really high this year. I actually think that people are paying attention, and we've made it easier than ever to vote in Virginia. So I expect to
Mm.
see a lot of people come out.
Yeah, and of course, all the while, as you're kind of knocking on doors, and again, sort of like this whole adage that politics is local. Are you continuing to learn stuff about your district, all the time that are sometimes maybe surprising to you? And then does that become kind of additive information to help you not just legislate, but to also campaign?
Yeah, I think when you're in an elected office, like I am in the state senate, and you're running for Congress, you have to be talking to people all the time, and so I'm never surprised in the sense that I have so many conversations around our community, different events and town halls that I learn. I'm always learning, and I think as long as you have that communication, another thing I do is my cell phone number is my office number. So like,
Mm,
so when people call our office, they're calling my cell phone actually, texting it.
right.
And when we,
Yeah.
I try to be accessible because it makes me a better legislator, and it makes me
Yeah.
feel like I'm not surprised actually when an issue
Mm.
comes up. I know how people would generally feel about it. So yes and no. I do think that being accessible has its benefits.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like being accessible, being relatable, feeling like you have a good pulse on what's going on continually in the district, and then of course having that kind of growth mindset of like constantly learning about things, and yet it's I'm imagining pretty taxing because while you're running a campaign, you're still charged with representing and governing. In this way, I imagine that being able to govern and having won elections in the past and being able to do the work, for the people and kind of represent them, I imagine that it gives you a platform for your record to really showcase. Um, and yet, in 2024, when attention spans seem to be so like fleeting, for a lot of people, showcasing your platform sometimes becomes a bridge to try and decide between old versus new, and people who are just hungry for change, but they're also sometimes have a short term memory for the institutional things that have happened. Is that weave kind of a delicate one where you especially have to try and garner support for new voters who may not know your record really well, and then fundraisers who are looking to embark on change? How does that, how have you been able to kind of grapple with some of that?
Sure. I actually I have the same message everywhere I go. I have the same sort of, you know, speech as I do at a fundraiser, as I do in a, one-on-one conversation. I just hone
Yeah.
on kind of the things that I care about, and they seem to be what everyone else cares about, which is I want to make sure our community feels safe. I want to make sure the community is healthy. I want sure everyone has access to the American dream. That means a good economy, good for small businesses. I think when you have like this baseline, we also want to look to the future, whether it's addressing an immigration system or the environment. Sometimes you stress one or two issues more in a certain audience,
Yeah.
but generally, my message kind of stays the same. I gave the same talk when I met with the NRA this past session. I told them the exact same things I tell people in a Democratic Party meeting. But the difference, I try to at least listen. I also had a pro-life group come in, and they talked about some of their concerns with my position, and I just told them where I came from, but that I understood what their intentions were, and we may not be agree
Yeah.
on this, but I think you have to listen to people who may disagree with you, or maybe. But I like to think that consistency and honesty and being authentic is maybe even missing sometimes in politics today.
Mm.
And so when you're like that with every crowd, a lot of people will like it. That's what I found.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned consistency and honesty, and I love the fact that you're a deep listener, engaging with people who may not agree with you. All the things you mentioned, right? Safety and economic progress and fighting, fights that mean something for people, particularly in the middle class. All the things you mentioned are probably things that a lot of people mention on a day-to-day basis. And if you ask just about every politician, they might actually say a lot of the same things that you just did. So, especially when in an era where distrust, sometimes can be a real issue for voters. How do you kind of break through that, right? Because at some point, everybody seems like they're certainly making the same kinds of statements and promises, and yet delivering on those things is a little bit different. How do you separate out the maybe grassroots reality from the same message that seemingly comes from just about everybody in politics?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I try not to promise what I can't deliver, but I have a great track record of delivering on my promises. So a couple examples, my big talk when I was campaigning the very first time for the state legislature, I just talked over and over again about how I'm going to pass measures on gun violence prevention that we'd never passed before. And then people told me not to touch this issue of expensive toll roads going through our county. And people told me, pharma had way too big of an influence on our politics and it'd be difficult to pass anything. And I got things done on all of those issues. I'm sure I can think of things that I tried to do where it was just hard to do. I think in Congress, we're not getting as much done as we are at the state legislature, so it might be a little harder, certainly.
Right.
But certainly, what I just try to say is I'm going to try. I'm going to
Yeah.
try on every issue. And even if it's just me, just my one vote, my one voice, sometimes all you need is one voice to be ambitious and optimistic. You can get a lot done. I've seen it happen here, and I've seen it happen. And you don't even need to be a legislator sometimes. But I think
Right.
you have to at least try, right? You have to at
Yeah.
least try. And that's what I always promise people is I will fight and I will take on the toughest fights. And I've
Yeah.
got a track record of winning. And you
Does
know that's
does
what I
that
try to do.
humility, in a way, or even kind of leading with empathy, have you found that that helps in some ways, kind of not just to win people over, but actually like build coalitions that then allow you to, in fact, make that progress happen?
Yeah, I think people, I'll get bills sent to me because it's me and because they feel like I will put together a coalition. I kind of joke with people now. People actually don't send me the easy ones. They send me the hardest ones because
Right.
they're like, okay, who's going to carry this bill? Everyone else is saying no, but we'll go to Suhas because Suhas got
Right.
that last one done and we had no idea it
Yeah.
was possible. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've gained a reputation for
Yeah.
taking on tough fights. And really, it's not me. Certainly, I'll to be telling voters I'm special, but the truth is
Yeah.
not, it's not that I'm smarter than anyone else or harder working. There's smart, hardworking people. I just feel like you have to start with being ambitious and optimistic and believing
Yeah.
that something can get done, and then building the coalition, finding the playbook, finding the hack, whatever you want to call it, and just doing it. And sometimes it'll take a year. Sometimes it'll take. I've got legislation that's passing this year. It took 5 years to pass, um,
Yeah.
but people appreciate you trying at least, and people appreciate you listening. And that's what I always promise I'll do.
That you speak to the power of patience there too, right? I mean, because you're sort of like playing the long game, and yet people have expectations that, of course, are incredibly demanding, and they want to see results right away. And yet you also talk about optimism and making sure that your values and principles are also center and forefront. What is this time in the legislative body and in the Virginia sort of state legislature? Uh, what's that kind of showed you, not just about patience, but in fact about the power of compromise without necessarily changing your values and staying consistent with kind of being who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I mean, we have to find ways to get things done, and sometimes people think it's blue team versus red team, but I think the
Right.
most lasting solutions and lasting results are the ones that have a coalition around them, and usually a bipartisan coalition. Because if you pass something that's super partisan and doesn't have the coalition behind it, people are going to spend time trying to tear it down. I remember the Affordable Care
Yeah.
Act was something I worked on as a staffer on Capitol Hill. Republicans have just spent the past 15 years trying to undermine it rather than try to fix it. I think one of those lessons is we should be trying to at least build a sense of like unity around everything we try to do. Now, I was there. It was difficult because I believe that Republicans weren't willing to do anything. They didn't want
Mm.
anyone to get the win. But, at the same time, I do think that even if you're not going to get someone's vote, you can get someone's ideas if they're good ideas. And so you can,
Yeah.
even when people vote against my bills, I get for their feedback on how I could make it better and try to fix whatever they think is good feedback. So yeah,
Mm.
I like to build consensus and I like to build coalitions, and it doesn't matter whether it's Democrats or Republicans, progressive or liberal or conservative. The lasting change is the ones that have coalitions and consensus around them.
Why do you think that is, that people gravitate towards the edges of either being black or white, or it's a this or that kind of choice, as opposed to seeking the grays? You mentioned the Affordable Care Act, right? I mean, like, people have been trying for years to repeal it as opposed to fix it. Is it just simply because it just takes that much more energy? Or is it because, hey, that's what voters gravitate towards, or or donors gravitate towards, or that it's just not sexy enough to tout that all or nothing kind of attitude, as opposed to really, getting to the middle and finding ways to really sharpen and iterate towards more progress?
Good question. I think we tend to gravitate to our different corners of the political spectrum, and it's easy to, you know, if when you're on the blue team and the red team does something mean or bad, it's easy to just say, okay, I told you so, and like, why should we ever work with them, right? And a lot of
Right.
these primaries are a litmus test in the end of how blue you are, how dedicated
Mm.
you are to the blue team sometimes. And I haven't necessarily taken that path. The path that I've taken and the message I say is I am on the blue team. I've always been on the blue team, but at the same time, the red team has good ideas. I'm good with that too. I'm open to good ideas regardless of where it's coming from. And uh,
Is that risky, by the way, especially in the climate that we live in?
certainly not in vogue right now.
Yeah.
When I started a caucus on bipartisanship, that was not a popular move in my
Yeah.
caucus or even in the other caucus. It's cool right now to be attacking the other side. It gets more likes, it gets more shares, it gets more attention, it gets more money when it comes to fundraising. And so
Yeah.
I almost see it as part of my job to try to change the paradigm and be the consensus builder, nice guy in the room whenever I can be. And that's
Yeah.
not as exciting sometimes to people, but it's exciting to me when I get things done and I have results to show for it.
Well, in the end, right? I mean, that's, yeah, it's first and foremost, hopefully exciting for you. And hopefully, more than anything else, your record is speaking for itself. I appreciate, of course, like many who probably are listening right now, that you're the son of immigrants, and certainly have, accomplished quite a bit as a lawyer, former advisor in the Obama White House, and done so much. I can't, by the way, forget that you're a medic and an EMT and a firefighter, and have had some deep experiences, there. And, how do you blend all of that kind of deep experience with empathy and humility, especially that the kind that's needed to connect with, everyday middle class Americans in your district?
Yeah, I just see it as um, these are just ways to serve. People are asking me, why am I running for Congress? It's like I can serve our community in such a bigger scale. 80% of the things I get are federal issues, immigration, national security issues, people having trouble with federal contracting. I know all those things. I know I've worked on the Hill. I know how to get things done, but I refer them to my member of Congress because that's what I have to do. And so when
Yeah.
I think about all, how do I speak to the, different parts of my community, really, I just start with service and what's going to be best for a community. And to me,
Yeah.
that, usually ends up, if my service has, at times it's been as a firefighter and an EMT, times it's been in the state Senate, doing what I do. And I think now, the time right now is for me to be in Washington because I see a lot of people frustrated with Washington. So um, I
Mm.
just go where I feel like I'm needed and where I can serve the best.
We mentioned the fact that your parents immigrated here, and I was just curious for you when it comes to your identity, your cultural background, your religious background. Um, how do you think this contributes in 2024 to American patriotism?
When I first was elected, I was the first Indian American elected in Virginia, and the first South Asian, first Hindu American. And, I saw myself not as someone running as an Indian American and Hindu American. I saw myself as running someone with good ideas who was proud to be those things. And a lot
Yeah.
of people told me I should change my name when I first started running, that I should,
Right.
Suhas Subramanyam is not a name that'll win elections in a southern state like Virginia. But, I wanted to embrace my name and embrace who I was and just come forward with who I am, but with good ideas. And I was really excited. Actually, there were other South Asians. There's two other South Asians running in the race too, in addition to like
Yeah.
non-South Asians. And I ended up splitting the South Asian vote, but I won the white people and the black people and the other demographics in the district handily because they just believed in me and they didn't care that my name was hard to pronounce. That some of them still probably can't pronounce my name, but they see me on the ballot, they vote for me, and so I think that there's nothing. I feel proud when I see that there's people of all backgrounds and walks of life that come out and support each other, and it was really really great when I was elected to see. Certainly, the Indian community was proud, but the non-Indian community was just as proud, and they're still
Yeah.
just as supportive. And so I think there's nothing more that makes me feel patriotic when I'm able to be me and who I am, and be accepted for who I am.
Well, I feel proud that you will always get a proper Subramanyam pronunciation from my end. This show will always pronounce Subramanyam very, very, very well. But does that now as we have more and more Indian Americans, South Asian Americans who are civically engaged and more engaged every day, do we run the risk sometimes of constantly kind of battling for the same seat at the table? And there is an element of cannibalism within the community where you're sort of like, well, I am running, and like it or not, there's some identity and identification politics that are involved. At some point, the pride that you just mentioned, right? Is that a I would say is that a problem in our own community, particularly when we are trying to build coalitions and we are trying to actually come to middle ground, and at the same time we're also trying to build donor bases as well for South Asians and Indian Americans. Are they just? I mean, it's great that they're faced with more choice, but yet does it also pose a problem when it comes to running a campaign?
Sure. I mean, vote splitting is a real thing. I think if, every time I've run for a new seat, there's been a South Asian and an Indian American specifically that's actually run for the same seat or
Yeah.
decide or tried to run for the same seat at one point. And what I found was there's other seats where they're open seats. Sometimes the person even lives there, but they decide not to run. They decide they want to run in the race that I'm in. And so I don't know exactly. I can analyze it all day, but in the end, I try not to discourage people from running
Yeah.
generally. I just try to be me, and if people want to see me in office, they'll vote for me. And I think it's
Right.
nothing but a good thing that South Asians and Indian Americans, and I want to see more Hindu Americans elected to Congress too, and elected to local office. I think it's nothing but a good thing to see more people running. And we're the long term, maybe there's I think there's a lot of different movements that are starting to support candidates like me. Like endorsed by a lot of like national Indian American groups because they feel like
Yeah.
this is a good opportunity to pick up a seat in Congress. But long term, I think um, it's only going to be good for us the more people that run.
Yeah, no, of course. I want to get back to one thing you said that if there's a tough issue out there, you get the straw, perhaps the short straw when, like let's give this one to Suhas. So I mean, tackling issues like, price gouging and pharma companies that are perhaps really sticking it to consumers, gun safety, cybersecurity, energy bills for the middle class. With all these things that seemingly feel and seem so good, like great middle ground solutions and gifts in some way to the middle class, and yet voters are still always pulled into these tribes, like you mentioned, like blue and red. They're just constantly, polarizing in some way. With your record of really fighting big fights, how do you draw attention for voters back to your record? Like you said, being you, you're just being who you are, and you're trying to make sure that you highlight and amplify some of the things that you've done. But how do voters feel compelled, by that? What more needs to happen so that people again are not necessarily drawn to the tribalism out there, but more drawn to what's not necessarily so popular to get more likes and more eyeballs on screens.
It's a good question, and I don't have a good answer for you. The reality
Right.
is, it is incredibly difficult to get my message out there, and it's incredibly difficult. I sometimes will do really hard things, and it's hard for even people to know that I did them. It's hard for
Yeah.
people, they'll know the latest like political meme, but they won't know that, we saved them $300 million across the state on their utility bill. They'll see the check and they won't know why. And so it's one of the most difficult challenges in politics is, and I always tell people that policy making can never be divorced from the political process,
Mm,
and even the way in which you go about getting the policy done. That process is they're all tied together, and no matter
yeah.
what, you try to you can try to pretend like the policy making should be different, but it's not. Our politics dictates our policy making. But again, I'm an optimist. I think you know that we will. We've faced challenging problems. Right now, it's divisiveness. It's trying to pass a budget without it being held hostage. And it's
Right.
trying to figure out really tough problems that aren't getting done because of gridlock. But I feel like we've risen to the challenge as a country in the past, and one way or another, we're gonna overcome it, and we're gonna come out on top. So I believe in the future, and it starts by, I think, new leaders who come in uh, committing to making change and committing to doing better, because
Yeah.
we have to.
One thing that strikes me about that is, again, you mentioned the gridlock, part, and finding tough or great ways to tackle tough issues. And again, it is impossible sometimes to really share that message broadly so that people sort of have it at top of mind. Thinking about what your experiences have been so far, both personally and professionally, and now getting that opportunity to possibly be in Congress. What are some of the things top of mind for you that in a way you've kind of had to unlearn about yourself? Or like maybe even just change the way you think, if at all, by the way, to sort of make progress happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned and maybe try to unlearn was you can't make everyone happy. And so if you try, you're just going to make everyone unhappy. And
Mm,
the only way you can come close is if you give them process, you give them a voice. And again, I go back to, taking gun violence prevention example. If you try to make everyone happy on that issue, a lot of people are not going to be happy. And so you have to start with what you think is the best for the community and what the community thinks is best for itself. And then you should just talk to both sides, even if one side doesn't agree with you. We have to have conversations with people that disagree with us, and we're not going to be able to make them happy. When I first started, I tried to reason with people, but in the end, the other thing I've learned is politics is not about reason and logic. It's also about emotion, and policy
Mm,
making too. And our policies reflect that. Some of our policies are not logical. If you think about it,
right,
and like an AI driven vehicle that is only gets in an accident once out of every 10,000 drives is much better than a human that gets going to crash once out of every 2,000, right?
right,
Statistically, it's better, but people uh, are more scared of the AI driven vehicle,
right.
and that's not logical, but that's the choice that that's how people feel, and you have to listen to how people feel. And
Have
sometimes even the
you
people that disagree with you will make good points. So you can't make everyone happy, and you can't just try to logic your way through everything. You have to hear people, how they feel and how it impacts them, even if the statistics may not show that.
have you in a way found yourself actually being tugged by emotions that you've been surprised by that haven't necessarily been the logical way that you would have thought about something in the past?
I mean, all the time. I mean, we have bills every day where we don't know if it's the best policy, but the emotions of surrounding the bill makes us want to do something. I mean,
Yeah,
I always I always have carried legislation to support first. Sometimes we put forward bills that we probably can't really pay for. It's trying to get benefits for certain cancer presumptions is very difficult. Trying to get benefits to 911 operators is a lot of money. Um, and so I know we have to pay for our schools, and I know we have to pay for so many other things, but I can't help but at least try to like see if we can scrounge some money for some of these folks, because there are firefighters dying of certain cancers because of their line of duty. That's
yeah,
emotion. I know it's not, and usually my bills on that fail because we don't have the money, but it doesn't mean
yeah,
I don't try. But yeah, sometimes emotion is very important, because I feel the pain of lost firefighters and EMTs in our community who maybe
yeah.
got cancer.
Yeah, and of course it's hard not to in fact pay equal attention to the storytelling and the emotions that are out there, so that in the end we're trying to make progress and do good for each other. I'll get you out of here on this. In a way, I've always said this, even on this program, that your vote is the ultimate showcase of trust in democracy, and people who are going to hopefully represent you, and in many ways kind of lead the way when it comes to all of our sort of civic engagement. What's your formula, if you will, for cultivating trust? How do you empower trust in constituents and people who you build coalitions with and stakeholders? Most importantly, how do you cultivate trust in voters?
Yeah, I think the way I try to do it is I try to be responsive. I try to be a listener. I try to take action when action is needed. And I just try to do the best job possible, and work really hard. And that's all I can do. The true answer is, everyone's got a different litmus test when it comes to trust. There's some people who will never trust me, who will never trust any politician to do anything. And
Right.
so all I can do is just try to do better, be better, and take feedback. I don't get angry. People have called me all sorts of things. I've gotten lots of angry calls, but I always try to say, I feel you. I understand why you're upset, and I'll try to do better if there's something that I did and we don't agree on this one, but it doesn't mean I haven't listened. It doesn't mean I won't take your thoughts in mind.
I'm not sure if I'll use this last question, but I have to ask you: does your litmus sometimes in hearing both the calls for that are supportive and also the calls that are really really not supportive and angry? Does that ever test your trust in voters?
I seem to, I don't know, the place that I represent, Northern Virginia, Loudoun County, Prince William County, probably some of the smartest voters, I think, in the country. They're keyed into DC. They know federal politics well. They follow state politics more than the average person. So I tend to have a lot of trust in my voters, certainly. I've never had another job. I've never represented an area that's different than this one. But I actually trust the voters quite a bit on the issues
Yeah.
because they live the problems that we're trying to solve, and they tend to have really good ideas. So no, I think I've never really had my trust in voters tested.
Well, whether it's in the public sector, private sector, certainly doing the good work of representing your constituents and certainly helping to represent Indian Americans and South Asian Americans out there. Suhas, we're so grateful for all you're doing and wish you nothing but the best. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. And for more info, please visit my website, suhasforvirginia.com. Thank you again for having me. And it was such a pleasure talking to you.
Good.